Welcome everyone to this Neurology Academy webinar. This was in response to the recent coronavirus outbreak. It was very much felt that something like this would be really helpful for MS nurses and practitioners, and I believe that this will probably be rolled out for our colleagues as well in the future. And obviously, depending on feedback from today, it might be something that could be done regularly. So welcome to this webinar. It's the Thursday, the 9th of April, and the title of the session is Mind Health in Times of Crisis. And my name is Ruth Stross. I'm a multiple sclerosis nurse specialist working for Surrey Downs Health and Care near Epsom. Sarah Gillett, thank you very much from Neurology Academy for hosting this session. And a very familiar face, I'm sure, to many of you is Jo Johnson, who's a neuropsychologist. She's very well known to us. She's taken a year out recently as a sabbatical, and she's written a book she'll tell you about later. And she's very kindly agreed to come back and do this session for us. Over to you, Jo.
Welcome everyone. I recognise some people on the list, so particular hello to Del and the Surrey nurses if you're already on. It's nice to be back into the world of MS. I've been using this title PPE for the mind for the last couple of years, interestingly, and my first conversation with people was always, what does PPE mean? Well, now, of course, I suspect that there are not many people who don't know that PPE is personal protection equipment or physical protection equipment, depending on what organisation you're in, for the body. And it's really important, obviously, to protect people's bodies against disease, in the police against harm. But I personally think it's probably not more important, but equally important, and perhaps going to be very important for the long term, that actually we learn skills that will protect our minds as well as our bodies. So what are we talking about here then, in terms of what would it look like to have a healthy mind protected by mind PPE in a time of crisis? Are we thinking about what it says in the red, getting rid of any difficult thoughts and feelings, and just being a bit like this dog, chilled? Well, I'm sure you know that it isn't actually possible, even if we wanted to get rid of our thoughts and feelings, to have no anxiety, to have no stress. And I wonder if it would actually be pretty boring, and we wouldn't appreciate our times of relaxation quite so much if we didn't have anything to compare it with. So we need to be more realistic about what does having a healthy mind, coping well in this time of crisis, which for me actually is much the same as what it means to have a healthy mind more generally. So this, my framework, as some of you will know, is the acceptance and commitment therapy framework. So some of you might not know anything about that. So anyone who practices in this model will call it ACT. So you generally know if someone doesn't know it so well because they'll call it ACT. ACT is one of the more up-to-date versions of CBT. I personally feel it's much better for people with things, chronic conditions, and certainly MS, than the traditional CBT that was much more kind of cognitively challenging to process. But I've personally found it enormously helpful in my own life. So I'm hoping some of the skills you'll be able to use, that you will be able to share with your colleagues and your families and patients as well. And actually these skills, until you learn them and do them on yourself, it's hard to infuse patients with them. So I'd encourage you to practice that and get your head around it for yourself first. So what are we talking about then? Well, to be mind healthy in any time would be to be aware and continuing with what's important. And what's important as defined by you. as an individual. That might be regarding advice that's been given by your trust, it might not be, but it's very much about what's personally decided is important. And we need to do that with focus, because actually if we're all over the place, very distracted, very overwhelmed, then we won't be able to do what's important. We will get distracted off. And finally, to do what's important with focus requires us to effectively manage our own minds, our inside stuff, which is essentially our thoughts and feelings, particularly the tricky ones. So I hope that makes some sense. It won't make huge sense until we go on. So I wonder what you're thinking here. In this, on this slide, there's 8 sentences, and for each sentence, there's a missing 6-letter word, and it's the same 6-letter word that completes each. So what do you think the missing word is? Knowing you're something makes life feel more meaningful in times of crisis, but actually more meaningful all the time. It helps you manage stress, be more effective, improving your cognitive and mental performance, improves relationship, even keeps you physically healthy. I don't know if you've got any guesses because I can't actually hear them, but often people say knowing your mind, knowing your life, knowing yourself, and they're always good guesses, but they're not right. So the word I'm looking for is values. And I've seen a lot of research on how knowing your values, being very clear about what and who is important to you, really helps people find life better in a range of ways. When I first started getting familiar with that research, I actually couldn't believe it. I felt, one, it seems too good to be true. It just didn't make sense to me. Of all the things that I thought might help in such a dramatic way, it wouldn't have been this. But the more I've worked in this model, it's often the things in workplace training that people will say was most helpful to them, thinking about their values. And again, it's been really helpful in my own life, work, and otherwise. So what am I meaning by value? It's a word that's been a bit used and abused in organisations, and often it makes us cringe a bit. It makes me cringe a bit when people tell me what their organisational values are, because often the behaviour of the person who's telling me them isn't congruent at all with what the values they're telling me are. So for me, a value in a nutshell is what's important and who's important. Who do you want to be is the real nutshell. And I like this definition, and it very much emphasizes a value as something personally chosen, or qualities that you want to show. And that feels particularly important. I think we get a lot of mixed messages as men, as women, as professionals. What society feels we should be doing, what our parents felt we should be doing, what our children tell us, what our friends tell us. And this is very much about you. What would I know was important to you if I followed you around with a camera over a couple of weeks? And one of the shameful things that I often say at this point is that whilst I'd like to, I don't care as deeply about the environment or animals as I probably should. And I know lots of people will be gasping in horror at that thought. But for me, I have many other things that are important to me, and they would include relationships, compassion, justice, reaching out to people who are hurting, to name but a few. There are the things that are really important to me, and if you followed me with a camera, you'd see those things were important to me, as opposed to me stepping over an animal. So the other important thing about values is that we need to be able to express them in our lives and in our daily lives. So these aren't big things, about running off to run a charity. They're about being kind to the person sitting next to you at work. They're about calling up your loved ones even when you're busy. Those kind of small actions. So it's only a value if you can show it in some small way. So here are a few examples if you're puzzling. So some of my values at work would include these, about being committed and authentic and supportive to colleagues and the people I see. This is my second son, and he's teaching my nephew something particularly tricky on the computer, and my nephew's pretty tricky as well. So when I asked him afterwards what values he would say were important to him in personal relationships, he gave me some of those. So what's the problem then? Because we kind of know this, and we kind of know the things that people tell us that should be important in order to avoid stress. But actually, in my experiences, in times of stress, in times of struggling, we're actually even less likely to follow our values. We're less likely to do these wise things in the green. And why is that then? Why is it that there's this disconnect between what we know and what we do? Well, it's to do with this. So as human beings, all our behaviour can be classified in two broad groups. We're always doing something, whether it's staring at a screen listening to a webinar, whether it's sleeping, drinking a glass of wine, chatting to a friend, texting on your phone right now. We're always doing something. And we're either working towards, making towards moves, which I would define as doing something that's in line with our values, behaving like the person we want to be, making life better, acting effectively, either at work or at home, or we're making away moves. Now, what tends to make the difference? There's a range of things. Maybe it's actually not knowing what's important in the first place, which again comes back to your values. To give you an example, I was walking up a hill yesterday. We're still allowed to do that. Very fortunate, live at the bottom of the South Downs. So I'm walking up this hill because I know that I should be keeping up with my cardiovascular health, but I really didn't want to be doing it. The flat was calling to me, and inside of me I was having thoughts like, you know, what even is the point of doing this? It doesn't really matter whether I'm fit, because I can't actually do anything anyway. I was very tempted by the corner shop on the way that's still open. The Cadbury's Easter eggs in the corner of the window were calling to me, and I had the urge to burst in there and eat some chocolate. And I certainly had some good memories of when I've done that in the past, and I could feel myself getting overwhelmed with anxiety at the thought of going up a steep hill. And the same things happens in relationships. You know, I want to be a good mom, I want to be a reasonable partner, but it doesn't take me long before something they do, especially at the moment in lockdown, really irritates me. They leave a cup somewhere I don't want it. They burst in when I'm doing a webinar, and up inside of me comes thoughts of these are dreadful people and I don't really want to be around them, and then I start feeling angry and anxious, and then later on in the day I'll feel guilty at being here when I should have been there, and all these kinds of things. So all of the time really we want to make towards moves, and the more towards moves we make, the more meaningful our lives feel, and the more able to cope with the demands that we have if we're doing that. But what happens is we get overwhelmed with this inside stuff that is a regular bully, and we get hijacked, we get pulled away from the things that are important, either consciously or unconsciously, just habits. So the problem is, isn't it, that the difficult thoughts and feelings monster hasn't gone into social isolation. He's still around, desperate to pull us into the pit of despair. And we can't actually, contrary to popular belief and what Paul McKenna is currently marketing, we can't think positive, put our hand on our heart, bring a little yellow glow to ourselves and hold it there. That is impossible, I don't think. There's lots of self-help material about thinking positively, but we can't actually control our thoughts and feelings. If I hold a gun to your head and say, if you get anxious, I'll shoot you, I'm guessing that you'll still be anxious. So that's a really important message to give to our nearest and dearest, and certainly our patients. We can't choose our thoughts and feelings. We can, however, choose our values and choose actions towards our values consciously. So we're just going to start with the first bit of how do we cope with this stuff in times of trouble. We first of all decide what's important. That's like our internal compass. No one can take that away from us, even in times of stress. So have a think about this. We don't have time to pause for huge amounts of time for you to do the exercise, but it will be recorded for you so you can come back to it, or right now take a photo of it. Imagine I've set up a secret camera in your house, and I'm going to record you over the next 3 months, or even for the rest of the year, or forever. I'm getting more and more powerful at the thought. Anyway, so I have this camera, and I'm going to watch you doing what you're doing. If you were always making towards moves, always being the person you want to be during this period, what would you be doing with your time? How would you treat people around you? Your family, your colleagues, your children, your relatives? Who would you spend time with, either face to face if you're able? Who would you call or FaceTime? What would you be saying, and to whom, and in what tone? How are you going to spend any leisure time you actually carve out? How are you going to create boundaries between work and home when the things are muting together quite fast? How much will you be moving your body, exercising, going out in the fresh air? What are you going to stop doing? And what would you be putting in your mouth via liquid or food? So there's some questions that will really help you clarify your values and what is actually important deep in your heart. And again, going back to the definition, this isn't about what other people think. This is about who you would really like to be if you could be your ideal self, because you want to be that person. Have a think about that. Then you know your destination. So once we know our destination, we've got our internal compasses, we know our values, so we know where we want to head our towards moves. But we need to do this with focus, otherwise we'll constantly be dipping between towards and away moves. We'll be getting overwhelmed with all the different demands and balls that we have in the air. So this is where mind gears come into play. So gears, I'm sure many of you will drive, and you'll know about gears. I don't know about gears. I don't even know what this car is actually. But I know that our cars have gears. And particularly when I was learning to drive, that felt like a very conscious process, much less so now. But we have different gears, and to start a car, we need to be in first. And if you went into second first, you'd stall, certainly in a manual. And in first gear, you plod along, and it wouldn't end well if you used first gear. I live in the south of England. If I drove in first gear for up to London, my engine wouldn't like it. It would probably blow up quite quickly, even if I was able to do that. In the same way, we have fourth and fifth gear, faster gears, that we can use on fast roads, which would be great for doing that Storrington to London journey. But if down my very small lane I was in 4th or 5th gear speeding along, I would probably run over one of the annoying children on a bike screeching right now, or crash my nice car. So gears are there for different contexts. We wouldn't say 1st gear is better than 5th gear. We would say 1st gear is ideal in that situation, 5th gear, all right in that situation. So what loads of people do not know is in our minds we have 2 gears. We are born in sensing gear. When you came into this world, you would not have been able to think about how dreadful tomorrow is going to be, or where all of this virus issue is going to end up for you personally or other people. And even for your first 2-3 years, you were not able to do that. You were not able to go in your mind TARDIS and go back to yesterday or to tomorrow, which is why when you study small children, you see that they are totally in the now. They are studying whatever they're looking at, they're focused, completely focused. As adults, we have been consistently trained by school, by the world, to come out of sensing gear, to multitask, to always be remembering yesterday, using our experience in order to plan for tomorrow. And that's great. It's amazing that we have thinking gear as intelligent professionals. We wouldn't want to be without that, and without thinking gear, you wouldn't be here right now staring at this screen, because in order to get here, you had to plan your time, you had to work out how to use Zoom, you had to get your paper, maybe a cup of tea on the desk. So you were analysing, you were goal setting, you were planning towards that goal, you were self-monitoring, you were doing mental time travel, because however long ago you would have had to plan to be here now. So that's great. Thank goodness for thinking gear. We wouldn't want to lose it. The problem, particularly in Western society, is we are in the wrong gear much of the time. There are many times when we should be in sensing gear and we're actually in thinking gear. Sometimes when I should be in thinking gear, I'm in sensing gear. That would be when I'm staring out of the window rather than writing a medical legal report that needs to be done. So it can work both ways. But I would say the biggest problem, particularly in times of crisis, is we're spending too much time in thinking gear. And when we're spending inappropriate amounts of time in thinking gear, we will be ruminating, we will be worrying, we will be regretting the decisions that we made earlier in the day, and we will have a sense of being agitated. When they've done some nice MRI studies now, and they look at someone in thinking gear, they ask them to think about lots of things, and then the same person 10 minutes later asked to focus on just one of their senses, listening, tasting, and their whole brain activity dampens down. Our minds get a break, our minds get a pause. And this is enormously helpful and relaxing, and what we need, particularly in times of stress. So, do you recognize people like yourself? These are a whole range of people that would be better off in sensing mode, focusing, when they're actually in thinking mode. And when you're in a conversation with somebody who's also in thinking mode, which is most of the time, that lends itself to a lot of relationship problems as well, and raised irritation between 2 or more people. So the good thing is we can learn to shift at will. So the first important thing is to actually just know you've got these 2 mind gears available to you, and anyone, certainly anyone listening to me right now, can use these gears and learn to do better in terms of their noticing and switching. And when we get inappropriately switched into thinking gear, we get hijacked by our inside stuff, the thoughts, the feelings. That's when we're much more prone to making away moves. So moving away from what's important, behaving ineffectively, behaving like people we don't want to be, being irritable, neglecting our family, shouting at our colleagues for things that isn't their fault. Or we just feel very agitated, very tearful, very overwhelmed and unable to cope. So let's stop talking, and I'm going to take you for a few minutes into sensing gear. So the body is an amazing doorway into sensing gear. And the really good news about that is I'm guessing most of you have your bodies available most of the time. So if you're willing, it's much easier to do this when you're closing your eyes. So if you're willing, close your eyes. If you're not, then just stare into space. It would be better if you put your phone aside, on silent if you can. And I just want you to first of all notice what you can hear right now. See if you can listen and hear even more noises. And then see if you can notice that even though your eyes are closed, there won't be blackness. There will be patterns of light behind your eyes. Just notice those patterns. And then notice your feet. Wiggle your toes about a bit and don't make assumptions about the impact. Wiggle your toes and notice what happens in your feet, in your calves, in your thighs, maybe even your back. And then notice if your feet are both the same temperature or not. And then push your feet hard down into the floor as if you wanted to escape. And just notice the difference that has on your lower body. We're not trying to change or manipulate anything. We're not trying to relax ourselves. We're trying to actually wake up to what's actually going on right now. So then just notice your whole posture in your chair or on the floor perhaps. And then notice particularly your shoulders, your neck and your head without trying to change it. Just notice what's there. And then notice whether your mouth is wet or dry. Put your tongue around your mouth, see if you can taste anything. Take a sniff. Notice what your environment smells like. And then notice that you are breathing. And notice that as you're breathing, different parts of your body move. Notice what moves on the in-breath and how it moves differently on the out-breath. Notice the air going in and out your nostrils. And then just notice, even more importantly, that there's a part of you that we don't even have an English word for really, which is your ability to notice, your noticing self, your observer self, yourself stepping back, because you're not the noises and you're not the smells and you're not even your body. This part of you can stand back and notice stuff. And the more you strengthen that noticing self, the more you will be able to be aware of whether you're making towards moves or away moves. You'll notice more quickly, you'll be able to shift gear more effectively. So when you're ready, come back. Now, some people will have experienced that as a nice mind pause. Other people, it will have made their thoughts go even more frantic. And some of you might have thought, oh, this is this mindfulness stuff I've heard about. Well, that may be true. That could be another word for it. I think sensing gear works better. I think there's a lot of myths about mindfulness, and it's being taught by a lot of people who don't really understand it themselves, and they are giving the impression that it's to relax us. They're giving the impression that it's to switch off your thoughts and feelings, but that's impossible. So if we come into sensing gear, it's in order to wake up to what's actually there so that we can behave more effectively. So we can choose to get into sensing mode in really easy ways. As soon as you notice something about your body, you're in sensing mode. It's almost like you need to switch on one of your 5 senses with full focus, dial them up. So you can listen. It takes 2 seconds to just listen for 5 sounds. You can focus on a body part where you're breathing, or another body part. Pushing your feet down is a really effective, quick technique that no one else will see. You can look about you and see what you can actually see. Notice something you haven't noticed before, turn your neck around. Or you can grab something that you love to eat and just eat it with all your 5 senses. Taste it, notice what it touches, what it feels like, close your eyes on it, smell it, really enjoy it. A good way to know when you're in thinking mode and not sensing mode is if you're in the past, which would be to do with memory. If you're remembering anything, even if it was just before this webinar started, you're in the past, you're in your mind TARDIS. Regrets, you're in your mind TARDIS. Or if you're what I call futuring, you're fearing, you're thinking, how's this going to end? How am I going to cope with tomorrow? How am I going to make dinner tonight and get all my work done? You're in the future. So just kind of notice that if you're doing either of those things, you're in your mind TARDIS. So once upon a time, a very long time ago, I consulted a personal trainer. I don't even really know why I did that. It puzzles me. But anyway, for some unknown reason, I wanted to strengthen my core. I wanted one of these 6-packs that people seem to be talking about. And I went once, and the personal trainer did look a bit like that, really. He was quite aggressive in his manner, and he showed me very carefully how to do a sit-up without hurting my back, and how many times I needed to do it a day, which was way too many. And that I did need to do it every day in order to get my strong 6-pack. Well, I walked out of there, and even before I was out of the door, I thought, that ain't happening. And it didn't. It didn't happen. I didn't do a single sit-up, and I've never had a 6-pack. I won't prove that to you. But, you know, that's the same. I'm telling you, in order to get a stronger mind, you need to get into sensing mode and practice it. If you don't do that, then knowing that you've got 2 mind gears won't help you at all. But every time you can say a sentence that starts with, I noticed a thought, I noticed a feeling, I noticed a sound, you've done a mental sit-up. And we know that's actually changing people's neurology. So this is really important, particularly for people with MS, because they have weaker frontal striatal loops, and this strengthens those abilities to be able to self-monitor and pay attention. So if we practice this stuff, our sensing mode will get stronger and easier. We'll be able to stay there more for longer, and it will feel more natural, and it will help us. Within, I don't know, 3 weeks, you'll notice, if you really put an effort into practicing it, after 3 months, other people will start noticing a change in your disposition. So this is a nurse. Sorry if there's other professionals. This is a zombie nurse. It's the only picture I could find. So that's what we do when we're not on sensing mode and we're constantly in thinking mode. We're running about like zombies. We're not paying attention to what we need to be. We're making away moves, then we're regretting it, then we're making more away moves. We're beating ourselves up. We're flooded with self-loathing. Then we drink a glass of wine to try and soften that self-loathing. We've got no boundaries between work and home. We're constantly overwhelmed, stressed, ruminating. That's what zombies do. They grab what's in front of them and they push away what they don't like. So sensing mode is a proper antidote to that. It's the start of a healthy self-interest that we need. So these are 3 good ways that you can start to develop your sensing mode. So just choose one routine activity, and the most obvious one at the moment feels like hand washing. We're all doing that more even than usual. So every time you wash your hands, just really notice your 5 senses. Notice what you can smell, notice what the water feels like, notice your hands as you touch them. Sometimes you can taste the soap as you wash, which isn't overly pleasant. So we're not looking for pleasant sensations, we're looking to notice what's there. When you first start, you'll realize when you get to the end of drying your hands, you've only managed to stay there in 5 sense mode for 1 second. If you're anything like me and you have a flabby sensing mode at the moment. So that's a really great way to start doing this in your everyday life. And as you move forward, you can add another regular activity like cleaning your teeth or putting your key in the ignition. That will give you regular sit-ups throughout the day without doing anything additional. No extra time is needed, which is why it's great for frontline professionals. Some people like the Headspace and Calm apps. Personally, I've never got on with those, don't enjoy them so much. Or you can do a regular, what I call a pod. This is a pod. Takes 2 seconds, really, a bit more than that. So you just pause. That's an important thing first. And you notice your stomach going in and out. Your mind might do what mine does and say, and it's particularly big at the moment. Just watch your stomach going in and out, or if you prefer, your chest. Then just notice what's going on for me right now. Where am I? What's my thinking? Give your body a quick scan from head to toe. Then you can decide what's important. What values can I bring even in this moment of chaos? What do I want to drive like? What do I want to say to the person I'm on the phone? Decide what's important. How can you make a towards move in that moment? So what we're trying to do here is drop the rope. So we've talked about what's important, connecting with what's important, how to do that with focus and to improve our focus, and then now how to manage those difficult thoughts and feelings that hijack us into away moves. How do we manage that and not get hijacked so quickly? We're not going to stop them. I've got 2 degrees in psychology. I've been practicing this stuff for 10 years. I still get hijacked very regularly by my inside stuff, but I notice more quickly and I can unhook myself much more quickly. So this is what it's like when we're in a constant battle with the thoughts and feelings that we don't like. Our faces look like that man's. We're in a constant place of stress and overwhelmed and ruminating. So what we're going to learn to do here is to drop the rope. This monster's not going to stop pulling. Our thoughts and feelings aren't going to stop being dreadful at times. All we can do is we can drop the rope, and then things start to feel better. So here's my first drop the rope technique. So what happens when a dark thought pops in your head? Now, I'd imagine at the moment, a lot of the population have this thought: I'm going to get the virus as one of their darkest thoughts. Perhaps maybe I'm going to die, or my MS is going to get massively worse, or I'm going to bring this virus home to my family. I don't know. If you can, get a piece of blank paper and turn it onto landscape. And just write in the right-hand corner your particular dark thought of today. Now, this is counterintuitive, isn't it? Because what we tend to do with thoughts we don't like is we kind of pretend they're like rubbish we don't like. We try and get rid of it. Find a bit of rubbish in my bedroom I don't want, I'll chuck it in the bin. Find a bit of negative thinking in my head, negative feeling, we try and get rid of it. But we can't. We can't do that with our inside stuff. So we're going to do something different. So just kind of take a moment to look at your thought there on the paper. And just notice your mind maybe saying, this is a bit stupid, or I don't like this. Notice your body and how it reacts. Maybe it doesn't react, that's fine too. Just notice what goes on for you right now. And then say it out loud. I'm going to get the virus. I'm going to get the virus. And just kind of notice. Then I want you to add just before it, I am having the thought that I am going to get the virus. And just notice what happens there. Now, not for everyone, these are tools and you need to play with them and decide whether they'll work for you. But what generally happens is that just kind of loses its power, just a tiny little bit of wiggle room. Just unhooks us a bit. And then put that, I noticed that. So you've got your whole sentence. I notice that I am having the thought that I'm going to get the virus. And again, not for everyone, but for lots of people, particularly if you do it on your own and slow it down and give yourself time to process it, you will notice that that is what diffuses you from thoughts. It stops you being quite so stuck, quite so believing. Sometimes our dark thoughts might be the truth. We're not asking that. So try that technique. Again, you have to practice it. So I can do this technique incredibly quickly now. I can do it sitting here. I notice that I'm having the thought that no one's listening to me and everyone's just actually chatting with their friends and family and having a bit of a laugh about me in the background. I notice that thought. So when you get good at it, you can do it quickly, but it helps initially to write it down each time, every time you notice a thought, and practice that. It's such an easy thing when you get your head around it to teach other people. Children as young as 5, I'll do this with. This is another one, and I think you're going to be unmuted here so I don't feel quite so silly. So, oh gosh, you're all coming up. Hello, Bindu and Alia, they're the only people I can see. Anyway, at this point, again, this might be our most scary word. You can do it with your most scary word, even when lockdown is over. So stupid is one of my bullying words. Fat is another one, depending on how I am. Useless. But at the moment, this feels like quite a dominant word. So when I say go, I want you to all join with me and just repeat this word, and we can make it faster and slower, and we can say it in silly voices. You do whatever you want to do. So we're going to start now. Oh, coronavirus, 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 corona, 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 coronavirus, coronavirus, coronavirus. We'll stop there. It felt a bit more sane that time doing it with I could hear some voices. So again, it's a very strange technique, and you can do it in your head. It works better if you can do it out loud, but obviously you can't do that in the middle of a virtual clinic. But just practice and see how a word that can feel quite scary, or a thought that can feel quite scary, if you repeat it enough times, the semantic qualities begin to be a bit weaker and it bullies us less. Again, play about with it, find the tools that work for you. So finally, on thoughts, this is all we've got time to do. We're never asking of thoughts, is this a true thought? It's not really a helpful question. So the more you get into sensing mode, the more distance you take from your thoughts, the more you'll be able to see your thoughts as they are. That means they have less power automatically. When you notice a thought, you can ask yourself this: is this helping me right now? So even like, what am I going to cook for dinner? That might help me later on at 6 o'clock, but it's not going to help me now do this webinar effectively. So we can notice that thought and then we can move on. Is this a useful thought to me? All my family are going to die of this virus. Might be true, sadly. We can't make those kinds of predictions, but it's not a useful thought. If I buy into that, if I believe that as the absolute truth, how will that make me feel? Dreadful, frightened, terrified. How will I act towards myself and others when I'm terrified? Probably not well. You can ask yourself, is this an old story? It's nothing to do with lockdown. This "you're the rubbish nurse" story, "you're the rubbish psychologist" has been around since I qualified. Bad mum, You know, these might just be old stories. You can just notice your mind is throwing up old stories, old headlines. Is my mind just waffling on? And either way, then you can kind of notice those thoughts, acknowledge what's going on, name the story, and then come back to your sensing mode with focus. So think about this. How many times when people are in distress do other people say, don't worry, it'll be okay. Don't get mad. Don't be upset. Come on, cheer up. Parents, I just want my children to be happy. Or we describe quiet babies, non-crying babies as good babies. So just notice that there's this massive Western thing, particularly I think, that has decided that only happy is okay. So when we get a negative emotion, we want to get rid of it. We want to struggle with it. So imagine this. Imagine that you see that and you've got to describe it to a blind person. How would you describe it? So you might say it's red and it's square. It's got some black dashes in the places of eyes. It's got a black outline, which is supposed to look like a mouth. It's 3D. The outlines are slightly darker than the insides. The top's the lightest shade. We can do that pretty objectively, pretty non-judgmentally. We don't kind of tend to think, I hate that. Why isn't it a yellow cube? Why does it have black eyes rather than green ones? But when difficult feelings come up, we tend to say we struggle with feelings. We get into that tightrope tug of war. I don't want this feeling. I'm not going to have it. And we try and switch it off. And we either do that just by trying to ignore it, trying to push it down, or we use unhelpful strategies like drinking or eating or running away, exercising too much, working too much, shouting at other people. That's one of my favorites to get rid of difficult emotions. So what we need to do is to be able to notice our feelings more quickly, and we need to be able to look at them as sensations in our body. So we don't have huge amounts of time to do this, but I will show you very quickly. So again, if you're willing to close your eyes, do that. And I want you to bring to mind something that's worried or upset you recently that will arouse just a little bit of negative emotion. So just bring up a person or situation that makes you quite anxious. And then I just want you to simply notice where you feel that in your body. Notice your chest, notice your throat, notice your stomach. Sometimes people get these feelings even in their arms and legs, in their head. Just kind of notice where your difficult emotions tend to show up. And just notice how big the emotion is. Notice how wide it goes, how high it goes. Just as if you're describing a red cube. Is it pounding? Is it 3D? Does it have a colour? Some people might not be able to feel anything at all. Just notice what the absence of a feeling is like. And then when you're ready, come back to the room. That's not very good, really. It's very hard to do that quickly, but you can see what I mean. This idea that in the same way that we are going to be willing to have our thoughts, this is how we drop the rope. By not struggling to get rid of emotions, by getting better at being in sensing mode and noticing them, just noticing what's actually there. So some people would ask, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to feel your bad feelings? That's a good question. And I guess people that choose to do that belong in the sadomasochistic club, don't they? Most of us don't like bad thoughts and feelings. The reason we do it is so that we can unhook and keep going in our valued direction. Because often the desire to get away from these bad feelings is like being in a rope pull with a monster. It takes so much effort that we can't do what's important in the meantime. So we're wanting to create a bit of distance. That's someone being fused with their negative thoughts and feelings. We just want to get a bit of wiggle room, because, you know, you can't control your feelings. But if I asked you to sing happy birthday with a gun to your head, you could actually do that. We can control our arms and legs and our mouths till we get really stressed. So we can't get rid of difficult thoughts and feelings, but we can be less influenced zombies by coming onto sensing mode and noticing this inside stuff. So lastly, I'd be just interested, the last time that you saw a friend in distress, what did you do? How many of these things did you do? Did you laugh at them? Did you say, don't be pathetic, when will you learn? Did you say, shut up, you're boring and stupid, I've heard this too many times before? Did you force them into bed and ban them from any contact? Did you give them a blade and suggest they cut themselves? Throw food or drink down their mouths, or insist they worked much longer hours? Well, this is the key. So if you did all of those things, you are actually a rubbish friend. So you probably need to get some help with that. You shouldn't be working with people with MS. 3 to 4, you're not that great. 1 to 2, you could do better. If you did none of those things, then you're a great friend, and I wish that I was friends with you. Aren't we good most of the time, particularly as health professionals, at being good friends, being good colleagues, often even being good employees, good managers? But to ourselves, we do all of that stuff, don't we? Instead of experiencing the feelings, we have another glass of wine, eat a shed load of chocolate until we're sick, blame other people. And our minds are natural bullies. And when we're hurting or frightened, we tend to do that even more. Come on, get a grip. Everyone else is coping. Why aren't you coping? You're pathetic. What's wrong with you? You're not up to this job. That's what our minds do to ourselves naturally. So can you just notice that? The more you're in sensing mode, the more you're noticing your stuff, the more you'll do that. And when you see your mind being such a vicious bully, can you treat your mind a bit like you would when some children are fighting, and when one child is being really mean to another, perhaps you just say, you know, stop, that's really spiteful. And then see what you can do for yourself in that moment. Can you be a better mate, a good friend to yourself? Can you make yourself a glass of hot chocolate, or I don't know, eat some food with your sensing mode, read a nice novel, whatever takes you towards what's important. So just take a final pause, notice your breathing, observe what's going on for me right now. What are my thoughts? Where am I? How is my body feeling? And then you can decide what's important. What might you want to do next? Obviously, at the moment, you're still here. If you're on your own, you might want to take a bath, take a break, drink some water, phone a friend, just take some more pods. Or you might want to read a really good page-turning novel. So I've written you one. That's what I was doing last year, writing a book called Surviving Me. You couldn't have a better title, could you, for this current climate? So it's about what happens to two men when they listen hard to their minds. And the themes are neurology and psychology, and it's on offer on Amazon at the moment. These are some other books I would thoroughly recommend you really trying to infuse any children you know with these skills. The earlier you learn to be in sensing mode more often, the better you'll be in life. So there's a range of resources there for children, teens and adults. Guy Meadows' book about sleep is fantastic. It's acceptance and commitment therapy applied to insomnia. And then at the top, there's the ACT Companion, the Happiness Trap app, which is generally £7. And Ross Harris has made it free for the period of lockdown. So get to know that app, even if you don't fancy it. It's a really useful app to recommend to clients. It gives you skills to practice all the things that I've talked about in this presentation. So thank you for listening. Hello if I know you, nice to meet you if I don't. best wishes and stay safe for the rest of lockdown. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you so much for that, Jo. I have to say, speaking for myself personally, I think I've definitely been in thinking mode more than sensing mode, so there's quite a few take-home messages for me. So I think we're going to have some questions. I don't know if anybody has any particularly burning questions. If you could just click raise your hand on the participant part of the screen on the right hand side, and we can unmute you so you can ask questions, or you can ask the questions on the Q&A.
We have got one question that's come in online, which is how can we help our anxious patients?
I would say exactly what I've just explained, really. So a really quick and key message is anxiety is normal. We're all feeling anxious. Anyone that isn't is lacking something. It's normal to feel anxious in anxiety-provoking situations, and rather than fighting with that, you can show them the technique. There's a marvelous video by Russ Harris on YouTube called The Struggle Switch, which shows how by struggling with our anxiety, we essentially put it into a loudspeaker and amplify it. Whereas when we take the red cube approach, we actually can process it and cope with it the more we practice. If someone has severe clinical anxiety, then medication can help them, but lots of people would be better off learning to process it.
Jo, I had a question. I find that often within the caseload, the people that don't talk to us, particularly about their anxiety or struggle to talk about it, are men, especially sort of 35 to 55. And I just wondered if you had any particular advice about how we manage them.
I think it's really tricky, and I think it's very telling that the biggest killer of men in this country in that age group is suicide, above testicular cancer, above heart disease. I find that very shocking. That's actually what my book is about. Men are very closed. I think, you know, if they won't communicate, it's very hard unless you do. I'd be really willing to draft an email to men. Dear men, we know what you do when things are troublesome, and I think they tend to avoid more, they tend to shut down more, and then they tend to leak stress in IBS and other kinds of physical symptoms, or be very irritable or angry, in fact. So I think support groups are really great for men, or linking men with other men. But, you know, in the main, men don't talk. I spend much of my time going out with women when I'm allowed. And there's a rare evening out when we don't talk about how difficult our partners or jobs or children are. My husband recently said, in the context of my novel, that in 54 years, he can't ever remember being in a group situation where another man complained about their partner, that's good to hear, or acknowledged that they were having problems in any area of their life. I think there's, you know, some people are worse than others on that spectrum, but I do think that's similar for a lot of men. So yeah, tricky. Men don't naturally engage so well.
The other thing I was thinking, and I know I don't speak for everyone because all our services are quite different in different areas, but for Surrey, we had a meeting last week and we have no neuropsychology services. No, we do have availability to refer patients for IAPS, for CBT. I mean, I guess my question is, it's quite difficult for us as nurses and practitioners to identify those patients that are high risk, that would need neuropsychology, if we could try and access it from the regional centres, and patients that potentially could go locally to IAPS. Any advice?
I think it's increasingly difficult, and I think a lot of the neuropsych services only do assessments anyway. I feel, as we talked about the other day, one of the things I'd love to do is to do more training with MS professionals, because I think there's a lot of work you could do just by dripping different aspects of this training for people and showing them, you know, a 2-minute technique, and building on that. Yeah, it's really hard. I think it's worth asking people whether they have health insurance or their partner does, because often you can get a psychology referral for a higher level service if you're health insured, and people don't always think about that. For some people, it's great to do talking therapy. I love the ACT companion. I think that's actually quite a good psychology starting point. Some people find time to talk really helpful, but I guess, who do you refer to neuropsychology? People at risk, people with capacity decisions, people that you're puzzling about cognitive problems, people that need a multidisciplinary team and perhaps don't have insight. They would be my starting point. Yeah, it's a really big question, and I feel disabled in my answer, really, given the services.
And I guess for some of our patients, they're now at home and not able to go out and quite restricted in sort of movements and being able to talk to others. And I know a few patients have said that their children, you know, are obviously their anxiety is higher and things like that, and potentially they're already worried about mum or dad. I mean, is there anything that you think that they could make access to?
I wrote a booklet for the MS Trust a long time ago called How to Talk to Your Kids About MS, and I think all the principles in there are how to talk to your kids about anything. I feel the really key message is open talk is the way forward, and you know, some of these techniques that we've talked about in terms of, you know, difficult thoughts are not made worse, they're made better when we put them on paper. And the more we as professionals are comfortable with that and disclosing our own dark thoughts, the more our patients will be comfortable with that, and the more they will then cascade that to their families. So we need to create an open climate where we can say what our deepest fears are, and reassurance is a terrible thing. It's the worst thing we can do, interestingly. It really increases anxiety and can lead to OCD symptoms. So when my child says, "Mum, I might die," my natural desire is to say, "Of course you won't." That isn't the truth, and they actually know that deep down. So I think it's about saying, yeah, you know, our minds are really beating us up right now, aren't they? That's a much better response than trying to reassure them, because reassurance is an addictive cycle that just increases anxiety.
I don't know if there's any of the other delegates watching, if anybody has any other examples from their services or anything that's come up that they wanted to discuss.
There's two questions in the Q&A.
There is? Okay.
I'm struggling with my mind health. How can I help others by opening up to colleagues? Would this help everyone so we understand more? Yeah, absolutely. I've been working with a doctor in Harrogate who's actually on one of the virus wards, and she's very much doing that with her team. I think it's also worth thinking about your values as a team and connecting with that. How do we want to be as a team in this situation, and how it feels to be dragged away from those values, because lots of us are being asked to compromise how we would like to work. But yeah, absolutely, talk openly. And one of the things, I do a lot of training, I've done a lot of training in the police in the last year, and they're a very closed kind of group, but one of the things on all the feedback has been how much they like the fact that I'm willing to share my difficult thoughts. And as soon as we share our difficult thoughts, other people feel able to answer. So I'm not typing these answers, should I be? I'm saying them. Is that okay?
No,
Yeah,
that's fine.
So the next, sorry.
No, do you want to say it, Jo?
Go on, Ruth, you read it. Give my voice.
Okay. So the second question is, when it comes to mental health, i.e. psychology appointments, what constitutes essential in your opinion in the current circumstances? For instance, there will be people currently waiting for new assessments, but due to only being able to provide telephone consultations, this is not always feasible and perhaps not best practice via telephone. Therefore, wondering what your thoughts were.
Yeah, my thoughts are this is really tough, and I think it's pretty hard to get psychology anyway. NHS services are under such pressure like everybody else. It seems to me that unless someone is really high risk, you don't get near the door, but I guess they will be the things that it's important to flag up. So if somebody is saying not only are they thinking about suicides, but they've got a plan, I think that's really important to make the psychologist know that. But I also feel that the more you as professionals can feel confident that you're much better than your mind tells you that you are. I know some of you're excellent professionals, and if a patient is disclosing stuff to you, they actually want to talk to you about it and not necessarily a psychologist or some stranger. So I would encourage you to not listen to your mind when it says you can't do this stuff, you don't know what the answers are, and to just start to talk to them about some of the things we've talked about today.
Does anyone else have any questions before we finish?
No, I think if there's any questions that come in that you think of later on, please do email them through to the Academy, and we can always see if we can get them answered. We can't promise, but we can try and get them answered for you at a later date if anything does come up after the session.
Well, I'll finish off the session and just say a big thank you to Jo. That's been really helpful, and I'm sure that lots of people will watch this you know, this evening, and a lot of our colleagues are probably at work at the moment still. And for me, the take home for today is to know my values, what is important, and who do I want to be. And definitely to try and not be in thinking gear, and practice a little bit of sensing gear. And I think my family would say I've definitely not been in sensing gear.
But they won't be either, Ruth. Don't beat yourself up.
Okay.
We're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat, and already you're being hijacked by your inside stuff that says you're not doing this well enough and you're not going to succeed. So you've done some noticing, so you've just popped into sensing mode without even noticing it.
Excellent, fantastic. Did you want to say anything else, Jo, in summary?
No, not really. Just it's really nice to connect with some names I recognise, and hello, and email me, let me know what you're all up to. I feel very privileged to be back into neuropsychology, and I'm looking forward to seeing perhaps some of you in the coming months. And just from me, before everybody goes, just want to say a big thank you to the Neurology Academy, to Sarah and the team for setting up this webinar. And do fill out your evaluations if you find something like this, or suggest other sessions that might be helpful. Thank you so much to Jo for putting that together and agreeing to come on today. Neurology Academy do have a lot of other sessions available, so do keep looking at their website. I think there's already 2 planned for next week, so they will be continuing over the next few weeks to support us. And thank you for joining us today, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye. Bye. Best wishes.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye.